As if one bank failure wasn't enough, you have now another humongous bank that is nearing collapse. If you are still living under a rock, what happened over the weekend was not over the weekend, over last week, was that Credit Suisse Bank, based out of the country of Switzerland, collapsed or was about to be in the process of collapsing, right? And let's take you over to a little bit of a timeline, kind of like what I did with Silicon Valley Bank. The previous week, you had Silicon Valley Bank collapsing in the span of 24 hours. 2 weeks prior to that, you had CEOs selling their assets, that being stock in the company, 200 million, or sorry, 2 million worth of stock. In this case, you have one of the 30 most important bank or systemically important banks, SIB, in the world, right? If this bank collapses, it will materially affect all financial institutions in the world, right? So, in other words, this cannot fail. It's too big to fail, but this is too big to fail on a global level, on an international level, right? I mean, this bank had been like on a downturn for years now. For the past 5 years, their stock was like basically worthless. It was trading at around $2 by the time this collapsed. So it was pretty much a worthless bank. It was being run terribly, right? And you would ask yourself the question, why is such a terrible bank so systemically important? Is because of the assets that it holds. It holds so many different assets all across the world. It is like a gigantic octopus. And the only reason this bank was surviving was because investors in Saudi Arabia were pouring in money, right, to the tune of billions and billions of dollars, to the point where they became 10% owners in the bank. Once they reached 10%, they were like, we're not going to put any more money in the bank. And that's effectively what they did. That's exactly what triggered this crisis, or not necessarily triggered it, but was the last drop in the wine cup, essentially. And that brings us to today's news, which is Switzerland prepares emergency measures to deliver USB takeover of Credit Suisse. USB is another financial institution. This is unprecedented, right? In the last couple of days, you had the Swiss bank or central bank backstop a lot of their deposits and also do like an immediate injection of money. It was to the tune of $30 billion. But now it looks like that's not enough, per the Financial Times, which reports this. If you have this sort of news happening, that means the bank is in a state of collapse. That means the bank is about to collapse, and to avoid that, you're having another financial institution take it over. This is similar to what was happening with Silicon Valley Bank, where the federal government in that case was attempting to find a buyer, right? They were unsuccessful. Then that's why you had the FDIC backstop all of their deposits. In the case of Credit Suisse, you have a bank that is willing to buy. I'm not so sure if they are willing to buy it or they are being forced to buy it by the Swiss government, since they have different financial regulations in place. I think we'll see more of this in the coming days, but this is contagion. This is what I was talking to you guys about in the last video. Like, this is the result of what can happen if you don't regulate these types of banks the way you should. Not only do you have Credit Suisse, right? You still have the fallout of SVB Bank. The New York Post reports that there are nearly 200 banks at risk. So 183, I think I saw somewhere around on Twitter. But the reason they report this is because the fact that the federal government, the FDIC, is backstopping not only SVB Bank, but the crypto bank that I mentioned last week, they were people who are in regional banks and smaller banks are seeing this as like okay, they're backstopping this bank, but they're not backstopping other institutions. Why on earth would I keep my money in a smaller bank when I can move it to a systemically important bank and just have zero to no risk, right? So a lot of people are leaving these smaller banks, leaving these banks without deposits, and a lot of these smaller banks, the 200 that you have on this article, also had a very similar instance that you had with Silicon Valley Bank, right? Which was, as a refresher, Silicon Valley Bank and these other institutions, just like First Republic Bank, were investing in long-term bond yields that would yield an income only like X amount of years into the future, so more than 5 years into the future. Some of them were even 10 years, right? Instead of buying 2-year treasuries, they bought 10-year treasuries, right? And if you have a bank in which you cannot secure all of your deposits, 100% of your deposits, right? And you're investing that, and you have that money invested in longer term securities, and you have a bank run, you're going to become illiquid, right? That's why you had the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. And that's where you might have that collapse across 186 banks or almost 200 banks, because they have exactly the same problem. They invested in long-term treasuries, 10-year yields or 10-year treasuries, instead of investing in 2-year treasuries, right? This is a result of deregulation from not only the past 5 years, or from past 4 years, 2018, but also from the past 3 or 4 decades, right? We'll see how this comes about. This is not looking good at all. Most likely, the federal government is going to have to come with some sort of emergency measure to avoid this from happening. But 200 banks failing, that is no joke, right? That's a huge contagion event that now we see is not only affecting the United States, but it's also affecting Credit Suisse internationally. So thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like, to subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your friends.